Patricia Bernstein is the author of $10 to Hate, the Texas man who fought the Klan. You can follow her on Twitter at $10 to Hate. That's the number 2, $10 to Hate. So, Patricia, the Klan, we always think of the Klan sort of happening organically, but you describe in the book how they made a concerted effort to push into Texas.
Well, it coincided with the Confederate reunion that was held in Houston in the fall of 1920. And I read about these Klansmen riding in the parade with all the Confederate veterans, and these were people who hadn't fought anybody. Your thought is, what are they even doing there? Why are they allowing them to join this parade? But, The Birth of a Nation had come out, and there was all this mythology around the lost cause and glorifying the Klan as having saved white supremacy in the South. So they allowed them to take part, and that's when they started organizing in Houston first.
And again, that's where you describe the silent parade.
Yeah, it's kind of spooky, isn't it? And they even talk about Black people fading away from the parade route when the Klan went by.
Yeah, they had turned out for the parade, for the town event, and as the Klansmen came, they just sort of back into the crowd, disappeared. Very sober. It must have been, I can't imagine the kind of alarm, watching those Klansmen parade down the street. Chilling, very chilling. They started harassing people, bellboys, anyone, lashings, castrations. They really did barbaric things.
Well, like I said, when they did attack a Black person, they always retreated the most brutally of all. And there was an unfortunate bellboy who got caught in a white woman's room in the elegant Adolphus Hotel in Dallas. But, this was not an uncommon thing. I mean, these traveling salesmen coming through, they expected the bellboys to supply them with booze and supply them with prostitutes or whatever they wanted. But they took him out and they whipped him, and then they branded him with the initials KKK on his forehead.
With acid?
With acid. And there's a picture of him in the book. I haven't been able to quite figure out whether that's an actual photographic image or a drawing, but it's very disturbing. And there was a dentist, an African-American dentist in Houston who was castrated.
And the police asked him, do you want protection? And he was like, why? There's nothing left to do to me.
Exactly. That's what he said. Yeah, it was pretty awful. And if you'll allow me, I would love to mention the hero in the book, because it's not all dark and miserable and horrible, and this is the worst that humanity's capable of, because we do have a forgotten hero who I think really his memory should be revived. He was only 29 years old. He had started working as a child, and I think people grew up faster in those days anyway. They didn't live as long. They had to accomplish what they were going to accomplish. He was a 29-year-old district attorney covering both Williamson County and Travis County in central Texas. Travis is where Austin is. And he had never cottoned to the Klan from the very beginning. They had threatened to run people against him. He said, I don't care. I'm going to beat you anyway. His first law partner was a Jewish guy he grew up with. He had a beloved teacher in high school who was an Irish Catholic from Ireland. And he wasn't concerned. But beyond all that, the great love of his life was the law. And he could not tolerate an organization that considered itself to be above the law and to be able to do things that lawmen weren't allowed to do. So he decided he was not only going to put on trial this group of lowlifes who had attacked this poor former soldier, he was going to put the Klan itself on trial and expose it for what it was. So you were talking about journalism and publicity a minute ago. I think his great success was because not only was he really good in the courtroom, and he managed somehow to keep Klansmen off the grand jury and off the trial jury, which other prosecutors had not been able to do because others had gone after the Klan. But he saw that there was only one reporter when he started out with the first trial, and she was kind of lazily sending out about 100 words a day. And he went to her and he said, I will give you a detailed blow-by-blow account of what happens in the courtroom every day. And if you don't want to pay to put it on the wire services, I will. And it was so successful that by the time of the last trial, he said, there were as many reporters as there were members of the jury. And young Dan Moody became a national sensation overnight. And in 1926, at the age of 33, he was elected the youngest governor that Texas ever had.
We should go back and explain that what he was prosecuting he was district attorney at the time for these two counties was that case that you described of that soldier who had taken up with the widow, and it was that Easter Day, April 1st. Was it 1923?
1923.
1923 attack on this man who had simply perhaps been keeping company with a childhood friend, and the Klan didn't like that, so they beat him nearly to death. And so Dan Moody decided that he was going to prosecute this crime.
This was his big opportunity. And he became so famous that they even talked about running him on a national ticket with Franklin Roosevelt. I'm kind of sorry that never happened. Roosevelt ended up with a different Texan. But that made sense. They were trying to appeal to the South. So he didn't become vice president or president, but I think what he did was still absolutely remarkable. And it's fun to read. I mean, the New York Times sent someone to profile him, the Philadelphia Inquirer. Every magazine did a feature on him. They compared him to Moses. They compared him to St. George fighting the dragon. I mean, it was like no metaphor was too outrageous because, people had seen this happening for a couple of years at that point, and it seemed like finally somebody was taking action.
It's unfortunate in the context of these times, perhaps understandable in the context of the day, that it took the prosecution of the beating of a white man to bring Dan Moody to prominence and to change perceptions and to make this historic moment against the Klan.
But if you don't mind my saying so, Julie, I started out thinking this was just interesting history and a story of a wonderful old-time hero that people should know about. And while I was working on the book, I started hearing people in the public arena saying things that sounded like Klan speak to me.
Like what, for example?
Like a presidential candidate kicking off a campaign by referring to undocumented Mexicans as being criminals and rapists. All of them, or almost all of them.
That harkened back to what you were researching for the book.
Accusing immigrants of bringing leprosy and Ebola into the country. Or here just recently, Congressman Steve King with this comment about we can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies. Well, that means, I guess, we're the main people, the white people, and everybody else is somebody else. And it seemed like all through my life, it's taken us a long time to get to where you could think the bad thing, but you didn't say it out loud in polite company anymore. Or you might know of a nasty joke about some ethnic group. But you knew if you were around people you wanted to have some respect for you, you didn't tell that joke. And now it seems like we're going backwards, and it's not just Klan speak, but these terrible deeds that have been happening too. The vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, the mosques burned down 4 in just the last 2 or 3 months around the country. And I could go on and on. The guy who went to New York to kill black people. I mean,
What is it in this moment that is similar to that moment, the rise of the Klan? Is it economic? Does it have to do with immigrants? What is it that is creating these parallels in your mind?
Well, think about it. There's a lot of social and political upheaval and changing sexual mores. In those days, it was the way young men and women were behaving with each other. Now it's same-sex marriage and protecting transgender people. But still, issues related to sex, right? And then fear and paranoia about immigrants. And it wasn't completely unfounded in those days. They had some bombings, conducted by radical union activists, Italian anarchists. They think finally did the bombing on Wall Street in 1920 that was never solved. But you take this element that is so small and you apply it to an entire group of people, many of whom are just hungry refugees looking for a safe place to build a better life for themselves. And I have to mention, before we're done, the Immigration Act of 1924, which the Klan supported, because this Klan grew up and died in a few years, mostly because of the bad behavior of their leaders. But a lot of the evil that it did lingered on. I know you know that there were pockets of Klan in East Texas for many years afterwards, and other people have told me about similar things in other parts of the country. But the Immigration Act, it banned all East Asians, all Middle Easterners, all Indians, and then set quotas for European countries. So the Nordic countries had the so-called Nordic countries had relatively generous quotas. but immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, they didn't say we're going to ban Jews, we're going to ban Catholics. We're just going to happen to reduce to a trickle immigration from these countries that are majority Catholic or Jewish. And less than 20 years later, the Holocaust took place. And that act, plus rampant anti-Semitism in the State Department, meant that thousands of Jewish refugees who might have been able to find a haven here, including, and many of whom had relatives here, including my grandfather's 3 sisters and their families who disappeared in the Holocaust, they couldn't come here. And the Commissioner of Immigration at the time even accused American consulates in Europe of competing to see who could issue the smallest number of visas to desperate refugees. So that's what can happen when poison infects a society. It can have long-lasting effects. But I think Moody is a model for how you fight it.
Dan Moody is the man. $10 to Hate, the Texas man who fought the Klan. Patricia Bernstein is the author. You can find her on Twitter at $10 and the number 2 hate. You've given us so much to think about. Thank you.
And also patriciabernstein.com. There's an excerpt there that they can read.
patriciabernstein.com. Check out the book. A really, really incredible read. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm Julie Mason. You're listening to The Press Pool on SiriusXM's POTUS.